This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Well, we're in the middle of a sermon series on soul keeping. What does it mean? What does it mean that we are called to be about soul keeping? The book by John Ortberg, the book looks like this, and we've been studying it. We have copies of the participant guide still left in the back if you wanted to join in after, now that we've been in it a little bit. But in this particular book, the subtitle is Caring for the Most Important Part of You. Caring for the most important part of you. The soul is that thing that connects us to God. The soul is the thing that binds us together with God. It internally binds all of the pieces and parts of us together. Our mind, our strength, our heart, our will, our desires, all are somehow bound together with this thing called soul, which then ultimately, in the best case scenario, is connected closely to God. And once it's connected well with God, then it reaches out to our neighbors. Then it reaches out to those in the world around us. The soul is that thing that does that. And it is on us that we do things throughout our lives that help nurture that. When the soul is healthy, our lives go better. When the soul is healthy, our relationships are better. When our soul is healthy, we are in this close communion with God. But the problem is there's many things in our lives and many things in our world that get in the way of that and prevent that from happening. And today we talk about yet one more area of our lives where we find challenges. We find challenges to being in that close and intimate relationship with God and even with one another. Maybe the best example of that I can think of. Have any of you had children? Anyone? Anyone have children? Anyone have a close relationship with like a spouse, a significant other at some point in your lives? Anytime? Anytime. Some of you are not raising your hands. I feel very sad for you. I really do. How sad and tragic that you are ultimately alone in this world and always have been. But if you have ever had, now tell me this, were you ever a child? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. Now, see, folks, I know this is a Lutheran church. This is some group participation, folks, all right? I'm begging with you here. Look around you, folks. You are the few who managed to wake up this morning, okay? I understand. The coffee is going. If you're falling asleep, go now. Don't wait. Don't wait. I understand. I'm with you. I had my giant mug, so I might talk very quickly. Bear with me. Imagine for a moment the scene. Imagine for a moment the scene. You and your family have planned the perfect vacation. You have planned that you will be going from, and because I might have something that I remember about this, say from Michigan down to Florida. And at some point in this was supposed to be, according to MapQuest, this is a few years back, according to MapQuest, it was going to be a 15-hour drive, and you're like, that's not bad at all. This will be easy, right? And we really hadn't taken that long of a drive before, but we load the kids into the car. We load the pet into the car, the dog into the car. We're all happy. We're excited. We're going to Disneyland. Woohoo! And it's the middle of winter, and it's 40 degrees or 30 degrees back in Michigan, and it's 80 down here. We can't wait to get there. You're so excited. You get into the car. You get the kids belted in. One of them's still in a car seat. That's even better. They're trapped. It's great. They can't get out. My wife has the snacks right there in the center console, so you can just throw food at them when they start to go crazy, and we head out. And you're driving down the road, and no sooner than we're like an hour down the road, we get to a giant construction zone. Because that's what, if you've ever been in Michigan, as soon as you get to March, it's orange cone season, and every highway is blocked. There's some accident in the middle of the construction zone, so now we're stuck. So the kids now start to grumble, and they start to mumble, and they start to moan. And the two daughters start to bicker over something. Their son is next to them, and he keeps touching his sister on the leg, to which she keeps whapping him in the head. So now he's screaming. We're in the middle of traffic. We can't get off the freeway. We're stuck. My blood pressure is about to boil, and I am just going to go insane because we're on the happiest trip of our lives. Darn it all, we're going to be happy. And maybe as a child you experienced that.
Yep.
Or maybe as an adult you experienced that. And it doesn't have to be children. It sometimes happens, I've been told, between spouses on said long car trips. You know, I don't know if you ever could relate to that. I mean, of course, that would never happen to most of you. But I think in my own couple relationship, my wife might have had a few of those moments where she wanted to be the one hitting me upside the head because I was grumbling about some other car. Whatever it might be, then look at the story from Numbers that we just read a moment ago. Some of you are like, oh, that doesn't count. That's the Old Testament. You know, I only care about the gospel and those wonderful words of John 3:16 that just make my heart melt. Oh, they're so sweet. Jesus loves us, this we know. But we get Numbers, and you got to wrestle with that for a moment. Because what were the Israelites doing? Well, the Israelites had just been saved from, and you have to understand this to understand the story. Thank you for pulling that back up. That's perfect. Well done. Thank you. In this story, the Israelites have just been saved from literally generations, like 100, 200 years of slavery and captivity in Egypt. They were slaves. They couldn't control anything about their lives. They were being starved. They were being worked to death. They were being beaten. They were being told exactly where they could go, what they could do every minute, and they're finally free. And who was it that freed them? God. And who led them? By God's power? Moses. And they immediately, of course, originally, they started out overjoyed. But then they start walking. And they go on that long road trip. The trip of their lives. It's going to be great. We're free. It's wonderful. Until they get to the first adversity they come across. Because they find themselves in the desert. And the food ain't great. And God does provide the food when they complain enough. But then, well, there's not much variety to manna. And quail gets old after a while. How much chicken can you really eat? And after a while, they find lots of things to grumble about. More and more and more and more. They grumble and they moan and they complain. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? I want you to think back into this past week. Think back in this past week. Anything that you might have read. Maybe it was a newspaper, magazine. Maybe it was a website. Think back to television programs that you watched. Think back to any conversations you had with anybody. Was there any time during this week that maybe you had one moment where you were a little disgruntled or unhappy? Where you maybe turned to somebody and said, wow, this really stinks. Or this isn't going well. Or I'm sad, or I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, or why can't you do this, or will you do that? Does anyone have any instance where they said or did anything like that, even thought something like that? Anytime. Anytime in your week. Okay? Anytime? All right. Then we're going to try an exercise. This is our exercise. I want you to turn to anybody around you. It doesn't have to be a neighbor. I know some of you are like by yourselves in a pew, so if you have to talk to yourself, it would look silly. So you might want to come over and tell something, Kevin. What I would like you to do, turn to someone, and this is simple. One instance, one problem you had this week, one frustration week, anything, it could be anything, small, tiny little thing. You know, you were tying your shoes and your shoelace broke. Anything. One instance, share with a neighbor, go. I know I'm asking you to break the silence, but you got to do it. This is a very non-Lutheran moment, I know. Call me crazy. One instance, anything, one time, anything. Your brother's frustrated? Okay. Yes, my brother frustrated me too. I empathize with him. Yes. All right, okay, all right. Obviously, from the din in the room, obviously from the din in the room, was everyone here able to come up with one thing that didn't go well this week and share it with a neighbor? Okay, all right, we could do that, all right? Right? And that is the way it is sometimes with us. We find it really easy sometimes even to share with somebody about some of the things that didn't go so well. Have you ever run across a person, though, who every time you engage with them in conversation, it seems like about the only thing coming out are things that are frustrating, are things that are negative, are problems that they're facing, the challenges that they're going through, the depression that they're feeling, or whatever. I mean, we have, all of us in our lives, some people who are like that, who are Debbie Downers, who just constantly are filling the airwaves around them, whether on Facebook or when they call you or anytime you see them in public, where they just have to relate to you every sob story that's going on in their life. You know, and sometimes the truth is, though, that all of us get into those phases. If I'm really honest, I can say, yeah, I think I've had phases where I'm probably like that. You know, where if I'm really honest, even if I don't publicly share it, I don't verbally share it, it's weighing on me, and I'm really fixated on, oh, woe is me. Oh, woe is me. Oh, for the flesh pots of Egypt, when we had life better and easy, and because today's difficulties are so great. And sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes that's all we can see. Sometimes our eyes have scales over them, and we're not able to see anything other than the pain that we're walking around with, or the insecurities that we feel, or even worse, and this is where it gets a little different, it's also sometimes the wants and needs that we feel are going unmet. Because we live in a different age and a different time, perhaps, than ages before. Although I think all ages have had a little bit of this. But we live in the age of Amazon.com. We live in an age where you can go onto Amazon.com right now. Now, I'm not asking you to, okay? Don't go there right now, or I'll never get you back, some of you. All right? I'll give you an example. I have a teenage son. My teenage son loves Amazon.com because anything he wants to buy, anything he wants is usually there. And he loves it because he can find it immediately and he puts it in my cart. He's too young to have a cart. So whose cart does it go in? Dad's cart. And then he's texting me on his phone, Dad, I put it in your cart. I found this thing, it's great. And if you order it now in the next 5 minutes, it will come here today. Dad, it'll come here today. I think he's still hoping that drone's gonna come flying over and the parachute opens up and, you know, and his video game comes fluttering down and lands somehow through the roof in his hands and it goes right into the video player. It's amazing, right? Instant gratification, right? We live in a day and an age of instant gratification. And it's not just our kids. All of us, at one time or another, have those things that we want, and we want them right now. And we can get it. We live in a day and an age when now we can. It used to be, you know, my grandparents lived up in the woods of northern Michigan. And for them to go to the store, they would plan 3 weeks for the trip to the store. 3 weeks just to plan to go to the store. It would take all day to drive down to where the big store was. I don't even know what the name of it was. To get down to the big store. They'd spend hours at the big store. They'd load up the back of the pickup truck and they'd drive it back up to their house, up in the woods. And if it was the winter, oh goodness, they'd have to go even longer. Because the snow would snow them in and they'd go months. My kids can't even imagine what that world would be like. Think about that. They can't imagine what that world is like. But if I'm honest, I can't imagine having to live like that. Instant gratification. It's a very short walk from instant gratification then to this thing we call entitlement. Because my son now thinks, because we can buy something right now, that he's entitled to have it right now. It's a right that he would have it right now. If I refuse him that right, I'm a bad parent. And we just keep going on. Even I myself will do that at times. I think that, hey, things need to happen the way I need to happen, and I'm on it right now because I'm entitled to that. I've done this or I've done that, so I need it, and I'm entitled to it. Look at the conversations we have over and over again about things in the political sphere, and if you really listen closely to the arguments, almost always, one side or the other will talk about it being a right. It's my right to do this, it's my right to do that, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that. Instant gratification. And the problem with that is the more we get into that, the more it shrinks this part of us that is called upon to rely only upon God. My son is in this godlike state when he's on Amazon. Because if he wants it, he can snap his fingers and it appears. At least if I pay for it. But how is that relying on God? And how much of a walk is that to thinking about prayer as the Amazon.com connection to God? That if I just pray to God to fix what's wrong in my life right now, God will snap God's holy fingers and instantly it will be better. So I want my mother's heart to be better. All I got to do is pray earnestly enough. And if I get a large enough prayer chain of people, if thousands and millions of people are praying, then instantly God is going to fix it. But that isn't the way it works. That isn't the way it works. As much as we want it to work that way, that isn't the way it works. God isn't answer on demand. And we're not entitled just because we say we're followers. The God answering every prayer and whim with a yes instantly. There's no instant gratification. Instead, this relationship is very different than that. In fact, the more we get caught up in this wanting and needing and desiring and those things driving us, the more we resent the fact that when we don't get it, it doesn't happen in our way. And so it shrinks that part of us that's in relationship to God. It shrinks it, it atrophies it. And the only way to break out of that is something called gratitude. 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 Do you know that the Hebrew word, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I'll just blow it. I'll just say the Hebrew word for gratitude could be translated as looking for good. Looking for good. And therefore, the definition for us, maybe a working definition for us of gratitude is in my daily life, how can I look for the good? How can I look for the ways in which there is good happening in my life and in my situation, regardless of how it feels to me in this instant? Regardless of whether things are going my way, there are good things that are happening every moment. In the worst of the circumstances that I face in my life, I can honestly say, God is still filling my lungs with breath. That's something, right? I can honestly still say, in the midst of the flu, my wife, God bless that woman, did not leave me in fear of catching that dread disease. And she would patiently and wonderfully sit there from a distance, bringing me glasses of water, setting them down very carefully and running. But she was providing me with water. She was providing me with water. And from a distance, a wave and a smile every now and then. No, seriously. But no, it's how do we change the way we look at our lives, at our situations, at our circumstances, so that instead of first looking for the thing that I lack, I instead look for the thing which God has given. Look for the way that God is present. Look for that God moment where God has sent his angel and I am just blind. You all know the story of the person who was caught in the flood and they were sitting up on the roof and the flood waters are rising. Have you heard this story? Yes, right? The flood waters are rising and they're sitting there. And all of a sudden, these folks in a rowboat come by. And they're like, hey, do you want to ride? No, 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 I'm good, I'm good. I'm saying my prayers, God's going to save me. You sure the boat's right here? I'll take it. No, no, it's all good. The water keeps rising. Next thing you know, the Coast Guard comes through in one of these little life rafts with a motorboat, and they're coming by saying, no, you got to go. The water's rising, you got to get out of there. No, 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 I'm all good. God's got me. God's got me. I'm praying, it's all good. And they keep right on motoring by. Finally, a helicopter comes. They're dropping this cage down. A guy's going to come down and pick them up and lift them up in the helicopter. This is their last chance. And they're adamant. They're adamant that they're not going because they're praying and God's got this. But now, all of a sudden, they're fixated on all the other issues. And now they're like, oh my gosh, God is not answering my prayers. I'm going to die. And they do. And they go up to heaven. And they complain to God. God, where were you? Why did you not answer my prayers? This is terrible. This is tragic. And God said, I sent you 3 different ways of being saved. Could you not see my hand in the world around you? You see, that's the thing. In our circumstances, gratitude is the ability to open our eyes and to see. The ability to have God soften our heart so that we understand the way in which God, in the midst of these worst and awful times in which we sometimes find ourselves, the way that God is powerfully present. And it's changing the way we look. So it means it changes the way that we teach our children and the way we nurture our grandchildren so that they can begin to see that in a world of instant gratification, sometimes it's better to wait and to look to see that which they have. More often than not, my son has more video games than he could humanly play in a week. If he played from the beginning of the week to the end of the week, he couldn't even play through all of his games. He has so many games. But if you asked him, he has no games. And he must have this new game. Because that's all he can see is what he lacks. And he doesn't have eyes to see what he has. In the same way that I would say I have no technology at all and I have to have the new Alexa Dot thing because it has some new feature, or I need an Instapot, or I need you name it, right? I can't see what I have because I'm blinded by what I want. Gratitude. So there's an exercise I would like to suggest to you that you do this week. So that for us in our souls, we can begin to change our view. And what the exercise is this. Over the course of the next week, I would like you to do this activity. 3 times a day. 3 times a day. The beginning of your day when you wake up, you are going to write down 5 things that God has blessed you with. 5 things. That's all I got to do. 5 blessings that you've received. At the beginning of the day. In the middle of the day, when you eat your lunch, you're going to say 5 things. 5 things that God has blessed you with. It could be anything. Great, big, small. It doesn't matter. And then at the end of the day, you're going to write down 5 things. 5 other things. And at the end of the day, you'll have 15. And if you did that, and I'm asking you to do that every day this week, by the end of the week, look at this large list you will have. And will that potentially have changed your perspective? Changed your children's perspective or your grandchildren's perspective? I dare you even to go one step further. And instead of doing it on a piece of paper in your head, if you have Facebook or Instagram or some other social media or Twitter, go on there and on there post 5 blessings 3 times a day. And would that potentially even change the conversations that your friends are having? Would it move us from the negativity and all the things we lack into a space where we see the expansiveness of how God blesses us every day? In doing so, God moves our soul when we do that action. In the midst of doing that, we move our understanding and we take some of those scales away. And God then opens our eyes to see the way that God is blessing us. Can you try that this week, brothers and sisters? If you can, we're going to practice. This is one simple thing I want you to do. The ushers right now are going to come down and they're going to offer you a sheet of paper. On this sheet of paper, I'm going to give you a framework that I want you to use for this. It's very simple. Go ahead, just hand them out while I talk. You're just going to do this, and I want you to repeat after me. Blessed are you, Lord my God, for giving me, and then you'll fill in the blank. Okay? So let's try that again. Blessed are you, Lord our God, for giving me, and then fill in the blank. All right? And the reason we're doing this, I want you to do this. Fill it out, put it in the offering plate. Next week, I'm going to try, this might be a lot, we're going to try to incorporate these into our prayers next week, so that we as a community then can be aware of all the varied blessings, the many different things that people in this church say they have been blessed with. So one thing, I don't need 15 here, please, no 15. One thing on here, and then we'll see the ways in which we're blessed. And we'll publish that list at the back of the bulletin or something next week. But this is a way for us to be aware of what God is and continues to do in your life and mine. Despite the things that we might sometimes get caught up on lacking, this is a way for us to see the many ways that God blesses us every moment of our lives. Would you pray with me, please? Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks. I give you thanks for the marvelous way in which you bless me and all these your brothers and sisters. I thank you for these people, for their love, care, and devotion for one another, including for me and my family. I thank you for them and the way that they care for the people in the world around them. I thank you for the way that they're attentive to your blessings. And I am hopeful that as we focus on our blessings together, that through us, you will help others in the world to see the way that you are powerfully at work in this world. This we pray in Jesus. Amen. Please join with me and we'll sing. Place that in the offering plate.